Welcome everybody to another video, and I've been wanting to try this lens out for a while now. Quite a lot of my viewers have asked me about it, and I know some of my viewers use the lens already. This is the RF 100 to 400mm Canon lens, and I've been testing this lens out for the last few days. This video is not going to be a detailed in-depth review of everything about this lens. I'm just going to share my thoughts on using it, testing it out in the field for wildlife photography. And I've been using it with a full frame Canon R6. So just a brief overview of this lens first. It is a 100 to 400mm zoom. It's for the Canon RF mirrorless mount. It's f5.6 at 100mm and f8 at 400mm and weighs in at 635 grams, which is incredibly light. So this is how the lens zooms in and out, pretty standard. It has a fairly large manual focus ring and then a smaller ring towards the end of the lens, which are able to program different things for. So some people might program this for exposure compensation, for example. There aren't too many switches on here. You've got a little switch to lock, so it just locks the zoom in place where you've got it. And you have a switch for autofocus and manual focus, and then one switch for image stabilization. There isn't different options for image stabilization on this lens. It's either on or it's off, and I'll talk about that later in the video. And I hired this lens from a company in the UK called lensesforhire.co.uk, and I've used them a couple of times. I think they're really good. I'm not being sponsored by them or anything, and the lens did come with a nice chunky lens hood. I've tried this lens in a few different locations in different light, and most of the images were shot at 400mm, usually f8, also a few shots around f11. Now you might spend a lot of time out in nature, perhaps visiting nature reserves like this one, and that is where the weight of this lens comes in. It's just absolutely incredible. For me, it really feels like I'm almost carrying nothing around. Could easily carry it around all day. Makes it ideal for walkabout photography, for hand holding, and for travel. Here I was using the horizontal AF subject tracking on my Canon R6, and I found it locking on really well on both static birds and birds in flight. I did have a really nice pair of gadwall that came reasonably close. I was able to get some shots, and I concentrated on the male. This was where the sun came out and I got some really beautiful light. I've cropped this image down to 50% and it's showing good sharpness and nice feather detail. I tried some birds in flight and the focus tracked really well against the water, but at times it did lose the bird when in front of a busier background. Now, if you often photograph birds at a distance and then crop, you're probably wondering how this lens fares. This image of a black-headed gull I cropped in considerably, and I think it's held up pretty well. Gives you an idea of the quality you could expect if the bird's far away and you crop your image down. Obviously this is going to depend to some extent on the camera body that you're using. I did lose focus at times due to ripples on the water, but this can sometimes happen. Here's another flight shot of a tufted duck cropped to 50%. I did have a few situations to try backlighting, which I really enjoy, and here I definitely found a few difficulties with the focus where it struggled to lock on. In particular, this common turn, very small in the frame, backlit against the water, and at times the camera just would not lock onto it at all, but eventually it did. And I also had a swan surrounded by reflected highlights on the surface of the water. Focusing definitely became more inconsistent here, and I noticed that the highlights seemed to have kind of an extra shine around the edge, and I felt that this was down to the quality of the lens. Later on, the cloud rolled in and the light levels dropped. I shot some more of the gadwall, but this time in overcast light with a higher ISO, and here I could definitely see a reduction in image quality. The shots just didn't look that clean to me around ISO 4000. Just had a little rain shower there. It's a problem with making these videos outside. Now I just want to mention a little bit about perception in terms of image quality, because I come from a background of using Canon L prime lenses, which are very good. If you're just getting into photography, perhaps you're a beginner, then you might see things a bit differently to me. So just have a look at the images on screen and decide for yourself. I really wanted to try some more close-ups with this lens, so I visited one of my local parks for some grey squirrels. I was really happy with the focus here. I used the eye tracking focus option and it worked perfectly on the squirrel's eyes. Most of the time my ISOs were around 5000 here, and the subject itself looked okay in terms of quality, but you could definitely see more noise in the background. This is a good time to talk about the image stabilization on this lens, which I think is absolutely superb. In fact, I think it's definitely one of the best I've used on any lens. Here's a comparison for you to see how well it works in the field. This is the first clip with the image stabilization turned off, and this is the second clip with image stabilization turned on. And you can see a massive difference there. It is really very stable, makes it perfect for hand holding. I even tried some shutter speeds, knowing the stabilization was pretty good. I tried some shutter speeds down at 1/40th of a second, and here is one of those results. And again, the weight of this lens just makes it absolutely ideal for hand holding. At this point it did start to rain a little bit, like today, so I thought I'd mention the build quality. It's maybe not as bad as I was expecting. It's certainly not terrible, but it is largely made of plastic. It's not weather sealed, so I would definitely take more care out in the rain. It's just a little bit of drizzle at the moment, it's not so bad. But yeah, I would definitely use some kind of cover, lens cover. I really wanted to try some more close-ups with this lens, so I headed to the lake for some more ducks. This mallard was particularly obliging, was very close to me, so I was able to almost fill the frame with the head and breast. And you can see really good sharpness here. This was a good test, and it does show good sharpness. And I think most people would be very happy with these images. I also took some images of the beautiful male mandarins. Again, the focus was largely consistent. There was some missed opportunities due to focusing on the water around the duck, but it was generally good. Do you have one of these lenses yourself? If so, what do you think of the image quality and the speed of focusing? Let me know in the comments. One of the things I found very appealing about this lens was its minimum focus distance. So the closest it can focus to is actually 88 centimeters, which I think is really close. And what it means is it opens up possibilities for insect and flower photography. So I came here to a friend's garden to try that out for myself. Now, the first thing I noticed was I couldn't seem to get that minimum focus distance. I could only get 1.2 meters. And after a bit of digging, I found out that you can only get the 88 centimeters minimum focus distance if you're on 200 millimeters focal length. I was hoping for some butterflies here, but no joy with that. So I concentrated on the many bees. Now, it was difficult to focus here. They were still pretty small in the frame. I was using a single spot focus for this. And this is about as close as I could get to the bee, and to make it more frame filling I've cropped it down to 50%. Now it's holding up pretty well, it's a little softer than I would like, but again it gives you an idea of the quality that you can get from this lens. But I think this lens would be really practical for photographing your larger insects such as butterflies and dragonflies, and you could also use it for flowers and plant photography as well. I took a couple of shots in the garden, including this vibrant red leaf and this red campion, and really there's not too much to fault here. Most of my images were shot at 400 millimeters, which you'll probably need for wildlife, but I did take a few shots at shorter focal length as well. So my conclusion of testing this lens for a pretty short period, it is decent image quality, but it doesn't really compare to a more professional lens, and you shouldn't expect it to because it is a fraction of the cost. I'd say similar with the focusing in that I found it to be pretty reliable most of the time, but it did struggle in certain situations. And with f8 at 400 millimeters, I do think the lens is more suited if you're in a country that gets a lot more sun. But if you're just getting into wildlife photography, then I would absolutely consider this lens. Perhaps you're a beginner, perhaps you're more of a birder, you just like to walk around and take the pictures more as record images, you're not as bothered maybe about perfect image quality, then this could well be the lens for you. And I do think the image sterilization is absolutely superb. It's also really versatile, so you could shoot wildlife, you could shoot insects, plants, you could even shoot a few landscapes with it as well. Would I buy this lens personally? I think the answer is no. I'm happy with my EF 400 millimeters, and I think I definitely get better image quality. If I wanted something light to carry around, I would be more likely to opt for the RF 600mm f11, I think. And yes, you could put an extender on this lens for more reach, but I think the 600mm is better image quality, and it's a similar price as well, and you're already getting that bigger reach. And if you're considering this against an RF 100 to 500mm lens, then I would say that the 100 to 500 is noticeably better image quality, but it is more expensive as you'd expect. And if you'd like to see me testing out that specific lens with a Canon R6 for the first time, then just check this video up on the screen. Thanks for watching, I'll see you soon.